Hey guys, tonight we're heading south, way south. We're sailing on a ship called the Endurance, bound for the frozen edge of the world as the cook for none other than Sir Ernest Shackleton's Imperial Transantarctic Expedition. You've signed up for what sounds like an epic adventure of discovery, a journey across an entire continent, or at least that's the plan they sold you. You've got copper pots gleaming in the galley, sacks of flour piled high, and enough salted beef to feed an army. Maybe. Honestly, looking at the sheer scale of it all, you probably won't survive this in one piece. At least not the before piece you are right now. Your job, the most important job arguably, is to keep these explorers fed, healthy, and hopefully happy, using only what's packed into the holds. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your location and local time in the comments below. It's always cool to see where everyone's drifting off from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand in the galley, the heart of the ship, as the rhythmic thrum of the engines vibrates through the soles of your worn boots. The air is thick with the scent of coal smoke, brine, and the promising aroma of the stew simmering gently on the large cast iron range. Outside, the waves are just lively enough to give the Endurance a gentle, constant roll, a motion you're quickly getting used to. It's early in the voyage. The departure from Buenos Aires feels like yesterday, a blur of last-minute provisions and curious crowds waving goodbye. The stores are brimming, a veritable wonderland of provisions carefully selected and packed. Barrels of salt pork and beef line the storage rooms, stacked like edible building blocks. There are crates of tinned goods, sardines, condensed milk, fruit. Sacks of dried vegetables, peas and lentils mostly, sit alongside bags of rice and oh, the flour. So much flour. Enough to bake thousands upon thousands of loaves, enough to make you feel like a baker in a particularly well-stocked village rather than the cook on a polar expedition. Your initial duties are straightforward, almost mundane compared to the epic scale of the goal. You're feeding a crew of tough, adventurous men, and they expect 3 solid meals a day, plus cocoa and biscuits mid-morning and mid-afternoon. Breakfast is usually porridge, thick and hot, sometimes with tinned milk or a dollop of treacle, followed by biscuits and maybe some fried salt pork if you're feeling generous and the stores can handle it. Dinner is the main event, a hearty stew or boiled meat with those rehydrated vegetables that honestly taste a bit like sadness. But they provide essential nutrients, or so the doctors say. Supper is lighter, maybe soup or more biscuits and cheese. It's a lot of work, keeping the fire stoked, the pots clean as much as possible, and the food coming out on time, regardless of the ship's motion. You've got an assistant, bless him, but the responsibility for the crew's stomachs rests squarely on your shoulders. You joke that you hold the real power on the ship. A mutiny starts in the gut, after all. The men are mostly cheerful, full of anticipation. They talk about the scientific work, the potential for discovery, the sheer audacity of crossing the entire Antarctic continent. You just nod and keep stirring the pot, thinking about how many pounds of pemmican are tucked away for the sledging journeys. Pemmican, by the way, is basically dried meat pounded with fat and sometimes berries. Sounds appetizing, right? It's calorie-dense fuel destined for the men pulling sledges across the ice. A thought that seems impossibly distant as you sail through relatively calm seas. One of the things you quickly learned was the sheer amount of stuff they brought. Beyond the food, there were scientific instruments, photographic equipment, sledges, tents, and a surprising number of dogs. Over 70 of them. And they needed feeding too, adding another layer of logistics to your larder considerations. Though thankfully their food was largely separate, dried fish and special dog pemmican. It was fascinating seeing the dedication that went into preparing for such an undertaking. You heard stories about the ship itself, the Endurance, initially called Polaris. It was built in Norway, designed specifically for navigating icy waters, with a hull of robust oak and greenheart timber reinforced with iron strapping. This wasn't just any old boat. It was built to withstand pressure, a fact that felt reassuringly solid beneath your feet as you sailed further from civilization. It's a mainstream historical fact that Shackleton's goal was a trans-Antarctic crossing, starting at the Weddell Sea and ending at the Ross Seaside, a feat never before accomplished. The whole world was watching, eager to see if this final great challenge of Antarctic exploration could be met. Life settles into a routine. You wake before dawn, get the fires going, and start preparing breakfast. The days are long, filled with peeling, chopping, boiling, and cleaning. There's a quiet satisfaction in seeing empty plates come back, knowing you've provided fuel for the day's work. Whether it's managing the sails, tending to the lungs, or taking scientific readings. You overhear the officers discussing navigation, charting their course southwards towards the notorious Weddell Sea. You worry less about latitudes and longitudes and more about whether the potatoes are boiling properly or if you have enough fat rendered down for the next batch of pastry. A quirky tidbit you picked up was about the gramophone Shackleton brought. They'd sometimes play music in the evenings, a surreal experience hearing crackly tunes drifting across the waves in the middle of nowhere. It felt utterly out of place, a strange touch of domesticity on the cusp of the wilderness. It makes you smile. Even on the edge of the world, people still want their entertainment. You chat with the crew when they swing by the galley, sharing snippets of gossip or just the simple pleasure of a warm space and a hot drink. They talk about home, about the journey ahead, sometimes with a hint of trepidation that they quickly cover with bravado. You hear murmurs about the vastness of the ice they expect to encounter. Historians still argue whether Shackleton was overly optimistic in his timing, pushing into the Weddell Sea late in the season, but from your perspective, in the galley, the focus is simply on keeping everyone well-fed and ready for whatever comes. You spend evenings documenting your supplies, making lists of what's been used and what remains, trying to plan for the weeks, maybe months, ahead. You see the stacks of biscuits, the barrels of lime juice to ward off scurvy, a constant worry, the tins of emergency rations. It feels like enough, more than enough. You imagine Christmas dinner, even though it's months away, planning a feast with tinned turkey or duck, maybe even a plum pudding if the ingredients hold out. There's a quiet confidence in the air, a belief that with the sturdy endurance and the abundance of supplies, you are well equipped for anything the Antarctic can throw at you. You drift off to sleep in your bunk near the warmth of the galley range, rocked by the gentle swell, dreaming of future meals and the taste of fresh bread you'll bake tomorrow. The gentle roll of the endurance beneath your feet begins to change. It becomes less a roll and more a hesitant grinding nudge. You notice it first in the galley. The pots hanging from their hooks swing a little differently. The sound of the water sloshing in the tanks takes on a new resonance. Looking out the small porthole, you see it, the ice. Not just scattered flows like you've seen before, but vast, expanding sheets, a dazzling white expanse that stretches to the horizon. Initially, it's beautiful, shimmering in the low Antarctic sun. But as the days turn into a week, and then two, the nudges become more insistent, and the open water around the ship shrinks, giving way to this relentless, beautiful, terrifying white. The ship is slowing. Then it stops. Not with a jolt, but a gradual, almost polite cessation of movement. The engines still thrum for a while, a hopeful, persistent pulse against the growing stillness. But the vibration under your feet changes. It's no longer the rhythm of forward motion, but the straining against an unyielding force. You hear the officers' voices, discussions becoming more urgent, the sounds of ice saws being prepared. The crew attempts to cut leads, paths through the ice, using long, unwieldy saws that require immense effort. You see men out on the ice, bundled against the cold, working tirelessly, chipping and sawing, trying to create a channel for the ship. It looks like a scene from a painting, tiny figures battling against a monumental, indifferent landscape. You send out hot drinks and extra biscuits to the men working outside, watching their frosted breaths mingle with the cold air. It's exhausting work, and you feel their frustration mounting each day as the ice seems to close in as quickly as they can cut. Inside the galley, the change is palpable. The constant rocking motion is gone, replaced by an unnerving stillness. Cooking becomes technically easier. No more bracing yourself against a sudden lurch while carrying a pot of boiling stew. But the atmosphere shifts. The boisterous jokes and optimistic chatter begin to fade, replaced by quieter conversations, glances out the portholes, and a growing sense of unease. The ship is trapped. A mainstream historical fact is that the Endurance became beset in the ice of the Weddell Sea on January 19, 1915. Just like that, the expedition's grand plan of a transcontinental crossing hits a frozen wall. You hear the sounds of the ship itself protesting, groans and creaks as the ice pressure begins to build against the sturdy hull. It sounds like the ship is talking, whispering its discomfort, or perhaps its fear. You joke darkly in the galley that you're now serving iceberg-aged beef, which, trust me, isn't an improvement in flavor profile, just a testament to your new fixed address. Your daily routine changes subtly but significantly. The focus shifts from simply feeding a traveling crew to feeding a waiting crew. Conservation becomes a quiet mantra. While stores are still abundant, the uncertainty of when or if you'll move again adds a layer of calculation to every meal. You start to be more precise with portions, stretching ingredients where you can, making sure nothing is wasted. Leftovers, always minimal in a hungry crew, become almost non-existent. You use every scrap, every bone for stock, every bit of fat. It's a different kind of challenge, not battling the sea, but battling stagnation in the slow erosion of resources. The men still need their calories, their warmth from hot food, but you feel the weight of the entire larder pressing down on you. How long will this last? A week? A month? Longer? Life takes on a strange rhythm. Days are dictated less by the open sea and more by the slow turning of the polar seasons. The sunlight changes, the days grow shorter as winter approaches. The ice outside becomes not just a prison, but a playground of sorts. The men venture out, exercising the yawn, playing football on the frozen surface that was recently open water. It's surreal seeing a football match happening meters from the ship's hull, miles from anywhere. A quirky tidbit is that they even race the dogs on the ice, setting up courses and cheering them on. These moments of levity provide crucial breaks in the monotony and the low-level anxiety that permeates the ship. You watch from the galley porthole, a strange sort of a spectator to this impromptu icebound world. You keep the cocoa warm, a small constant comfort in a rapidly changing reality. You hear the officers discussing the ice conditions, the direction of the drift, because you are now drifting. The entire sheet of ice, with the Endurance embedded within it, is moving, carried by currents, slowly, relentlessly, taking you further from your intended destination. Historians still argue whether a ship could have realistically navigated the Weddell Sea ice at that time of year, or if being trapped was an almost inevitable outcome, given the conditions and the ship's goal. You don't concern yourself with the grand strategy. Your world is the galley, the stores, the hungry faces of the men. You find humor in the little things, like trying to explain to a fresh-faced crewman why tinned beef tastes significantly different than fresh beef. Answer: it involves a lot more salt and a distinct lack of freshness. The ice groans outside, a constant, low symphony that sometimes spikes with alarming creaks and bangs. You learn to distinguish the sounds, the settling of the ice, the pressure building, the ship flexing against its frozen embrace. It's a lull before the storm, a strange static period where the biggest challenge in your world is ensuring the biscuits don't go stale and trying to make dried peas taste less like cardboard. As winter truly arrives, the external world shrinks. The dazzling white of the ice remains, but the quality of the light changes dramatically. The sun dips lower and lower below the horizon, eventually disappearing entirely. The days become a long, drawn-out twilight, a perpetual dawn or dusk that stretches for weeks. Inside the ship, life settles into a new, strange rhythm. You rely more and more on the lamps, their warm glow a small comfort against the encroaching darkness outside. The sounds change too. The groaning and shifting of the ice become more constant, a low, resonant background noise that occasionally spikes with alarming cracks and bangs. It's like living inside a giant, creaking instrument played by the frozen sea. Your work continues, perhaps more important than ever. Providing hot, nourishing meals isn't just about sustenance. It's a crucial anchor in the monotony, a source of warmth and morale. You become intimately familiar with the stores. The ship was incredibly well provisioned, designed for a long expedition, but now the larder feels finite. Each tin, each sack of flour, a precious resource. You make stews and soups primarily from tinned and preserved meats, supplemented by dried vegetables. Cooking dried peas seems to be a particularly persistent challenge. No matter what you do, they retain a certain defiant resistance to anything resembling pleasant texture. You try soaking them for ages, boiling them for hours, adding every spice you can find, but they just sit there in the pot, judging you with their dull green eyes. It's a humbling experience for a cook. The routine revolves around meal times, breakfast, lunch, dinner, plus the all-important afternoon tea. These moments break the day, bring the men together, and provide a sense of normalcy. You overhear conversations that used to be about landfalls and navigation now centering on the merits of various brands of tinned fish, or predictions about when the ice might break. The lack of fresh food is a constant hurdle. Scurvy is a known threat on long voyages, though Shackleton was acutely aware of this, and the stores include anti-scorbutics like lime juice. You make sure these are distributed regularly, a tangy, necessary evil that tastes suspiciously like floor cleaner but keeps the worst at bay. Making food appealing when your primary ingredients are variations on salted, dried, or tinned requires creativity. You experiment with baking, turning out loaves of bread and sometimes even cakes if you can justify the use of precious sugar and flour. The smell of fresh baking is a powerful antidote to the stagnant air of the trapped ship. The men find ways to pass the time. Scientific observations continue, measuring the thickness of the ice, recording temperatures, studying the subtle currents that are carrying the ship in its frozen prison slowly northwards. Others read, play cards, write in journals, or attend lectures given by the scientists on board. There's a surprising amount of intellectual activity happening in this frozen stasis. A mainstream historical fact about this period is that the crew maintained a regular schedule of exercise, scientific work, and even staged theatrical performances and sing-alongs to combat the effects of isolation and darkness. You hear the sounds of mandolins and banjos echoing through the ship some evenings, a surreal soundtrack to being stuck in the ice at the bottom of the world. You often have to shush them slightly when you're trying to concentrate on keeping the pea soup from boiling over, but secretly you appreciate the distraction it provides for everyone, including yourself. The dogs, too, are a central focus. They live on the ice near the ship, their barking and howling a constant reminder of the wildness just outside. The men exercise them regularly, essential for their health and readiness. Watching them race and play in the snow is a simple pleasure. A quirky tidbit from this time is that they built igloos on the ice for the dogs' shelter, carefully constructed mini homes out of snow blocks. It seems incredibly British, doesn't it? Building little houses for the pigs while you're literally frozen solid in the Antarctic. You joke with one of the dog handlers that their accommodation is better than yours, though you wouldn't trade places for all the tinned beef in the world. The psychological toll of the darkness and the lack of progress begins to weigh on people. The initial excitement of the expedition is long gone, replaced by a weary patience. There are petty squabbles, moments of tension born of close confinement. You see it in the galley too. Shorter tempers, moments of quiet despair. Your role extends beyond cooking. You become a listener, a dispenser of small comforts, sometimes just a neutral presence in the middle of it all. You try to keep the galley a bright, cheerful space, a refuge from the gloom outside and the anxieties within. Historians still argue whether Shackleton should have attempted to winter on the ice at all, or if trying to retreat north earlier was a more viable option, though the speed at which they were trapped made options limited. From your perspective, stuck below decks wrestling with recalcitrant dried vegetables, such grand strategic debates seem distant. Your world is the heat of the stove, the rattle of pans, the necessity of keeping 28 men fed and, hopefully, cheerful. You learn to find beauty in the small things, the patterns the frost makes on the porthole glass, the way the lamplight catches the steam rising from a pot of stew. The genuine gratitude in a man's eyes for a hot mug of cocoa on a cold, dark night. It's a strange, suspended life, waiting for the ice to decide your fate. And you keep cooking, because that, at least, is something you can control. The long twilight persists, that weak, watery light clinging to the horizon for hours before fading into utter blackness. The sameness of the days is only punctuated by the increasing intensity of the ice pressure. It starts subtly, perhaps just a new kind of groan, a deeper resonance in the ship's timbers. But soon it becomes impossible to ignore. The low background hum you'd gotten used to transforms into something far more sinister. It's a symphony of stress, conducted by the unimaginable forces of the frozen ocean. You lie in your bunk at night and listen, trying to discern the difference between a normal creak and a warning sound. Spoiler alert, they all start sounding like warning sounds eventually. It's like living inside a giant cracking nut, only you're the nut. The sounds become more frequent, more violent. There are sharp, explosive cracks like pistol shots nearby, caused by the ice fracturing. Then the ship itself responds, a low, continuous groaning that rises in pitch as the pressure mounts, like a wounded animal bellowing. You feel it resonate through the deck plates, up your legs, into your teeth. The whole structure shudders, vibrates, protests. It's deeply unsettling. You'll be trying to stir a thick stew in the galley, maybe humming a tune to yourself, when a particularly violent crunch makes the floor lurch. Pans rattle. The water in the pot sloshes alarmingly close to the brim. You brace yourself against the counter, holding on tight, waiting for it to pass. It feels personal somehow, like the ice is a living entity that has finally decided to take its anger out on your ship. If ice had a personality, this ice would definitely be passive-aggressive, building the tension slowly before unleashing pure, unadulterated rage. You start noticing things. Small at first. A door that used to swing freely now sticks. A floorboard you could always step on without a sound now cries out in protest. Then bigger things. Timbers groaning visibly under strain. Bulkheads showing signs of bowing inwards. The stout wooden walls of the Endurance are bending like green saplings in a storm. You see the look on the carpenter's face, a mixture of grim determination and dawning helplessness, as he inspects the damage, trying to reinforce areas, knowing it's likely futile against this kind of relentless pressure. It's like watching someone try to hold back a landslide with a teacup. Bless his heart, though, he tries. The atmosphere shifts again. The weariness of winter gives way to an undercurrent of anxiety. Men gather in hushed groups, discussing the sounds, predicting when the breaking point might come. Jokes become a little more forced, laughter a little less frequent. Even the bashas seem on edge, their barks sometimes turning into uneasy whines when the ship cries out particularly loudly. You find yourself talking to the stove, telling it to hang in there, buddy. Just a little longer, we need this heat. Desperate times call for desperate conversations with inanimate objects, apparently. Your work in the galley takes on new challenges. When the ship lurches, you have to grab pots to stop them from sliding off the stove. When the hull creaks ominously beneath your feet, it's hard to focus on getting the seasoning right. You worry about the stores being damaged, although they are mostly well secured. You find yourself making comfort food more often, things that are warm, filling, and familiar. Breads, thick soups, anything to provide a small sense of security in this increasingly unstable world. It's funny, even in the face of potential disaster, a good biscuit can make you feel marginally better. It's the little things. A mainstream historical fact about ships built for polar exploration at this time is that they often had specially reinforced hulls, sometimes packed with timber or built with exceptionally strong frames, specifically to withstand ice pressure. The Endurance was renowned for her strength, considered one of the sturdiest wooden ships ever built. Her construction was a point of pride. Shackleton had chosen her specifically because she was designed to endure, to take whatever the ice could throw at her. The irony is not lost on anyone. Even the strongest ship in the world is just a piece of wood and metal against the power of a continent. It makes you ponder the sheer scale of the natural forces you're up against. You hear the term nipped more and more often when the ice grabs the ship and squeezes it. It's happening repeatedly now, each nip a test of the Endurance's strength, and each time she seems to hold, but you can hear the strain building. It's like a giant hand is slowly closing around her. There's a quirky tidbit you hear. Some of the sailors claim you can predict a particularly bad nip by the way the ship's timbers hum beforehand, a low vibration that acts as a sort of early warning system. You listen for it, and now a nervous anticipation that settles in your gut. Does it hum before it screams? Maybe, or maybe it's just the collective anxiety making you hear things. Historians still argue whether the Endurance could have survived if trapped in different ice conditions, or if the pressure exerted on her was simply beyond the capacity of any wooden vessel to withstand. You don't have time for historical debates. You're living the present reality. The sound of ripping wood becomes more frequent, sharp cracks that make everyone flinch. You see beams splintering, decks buckling slightly under the strain. The beautiful ship that brought you here is being slowly, systematically destroyed by the very element it was designed to conquer. It's a slow-motion shipwreck, happening in complete silence outside the ship, punctuated only by its own death throes. You feel a perverse kind of connection to the ship now, like a shared experience of enduring the onslaught. Every groan she makes feels like your own muscle cramping under pressure. You try to keep the galley running smoothly, a tiny bastion of routine and warmth amidst the chaos. Providing hot meals becomes more than just your job. It's an act of defiance against the encroaching cold and destruction. You measure out the dwindling flour for bread, listen to the sounds of the ship tearing itself apart, and stir the pot, a small, insignificant act against the crushing, overwhelming power of the ice. You hope the ship lasts long enough for you to finish serving dinner. That's the immediate goal. Survival, yes, but also, please let me get this fish stew out before the floor falls in. That's a reasonable request, right? The groaning and splintering reach a crescendo. It's no longer background noise. It's the main event. The ship feels like it's actively tearing itself apart around you. You hear sharp, cracking sounds that are unmistakably structural, like enormous bones breaking. The deck beneath your feet tilts abruptly, then settles with a violent shudder. Dust and splinters rain down from the overhead beams in the galley. You're trying to stack salvaged tins of biscuits, the good kind with the embossed patterns, when a particularly vicious crunch makes the stack tumble. You just stare at the scattered tins, a strange sense of detachment washing over you. This is it. The ship is giving up. It's like watching a magnificent animal finally succumb to a brutal injury. Word spreads quickly. Shackleton has made the call. The Endurance is to be abandoned. The news isn't a shock, not really, not after weeks of listening to her slow demise, but hearing the words spoken aloud makes it devastatingly real. There's a flurry of activity, but it's not panic, more like a grim, focused energy. Everyone knows the drill, more or less. Salvage what you can, leave what you can't. Survival hinges on the supplies you can carry onto the ice. It's the ultimate packing challenge. Minimalist edition, where your luggage allowance is dictated by whether you can physically drag it across uneven, frozen ocean. Forget your favorite comfy sweater. Grab the sleeping bag, and maybe a biscuit tin if you can manage it. You are naturally directed to the stores. Your domain, the heart of the ship's sustenance, now becomes a mad scramble to rescue provisions. Men are hauling sacks of flour, crates of tinned meat, cases of Bovril, the essentials. You're helping distinguish between the vital and the merely useful. Hardtack biscuits? Vital. Pickled onions? Useful, but maybe leave them for now. It's a strange, frantic inventory, knowing that every item you save might mean the difference between eating tomorrow and not. You feel a pang of sorrow for the items you have to leave behind, like abandoning old friends. All those lovely spices, the extra sugar. Sigh. Priorities, right? Food that is food takes precedence over food that makes other food taste better. A cruel reality check for a cook. Dragging supplies across the tilting decks and onto the ice is brutal work. The surface of the ice is rough, uneven, sometimes slick with recent pressure ridges. The wind bites. You watch as precious supplies are piled up, creating a small, temporary mountain of hope against the vast white emptiness. This collection of crates and sacks is your new larder, your lifeline. The ship, listing heavily now, groaning her death song, is still right there, an immense, heartbreaking presence. It feels incredibly wrong to be standing beside her instead of on her, like you've stepped out of your collapsing house and are just standing on the lawn watching it fall apart. The crew establishes a camp nearby on what they hope is a stable flow. They call it Ocean Camp. It's a rather optimistic name, considering it's just a flat expanse of ice currently occupied by a pile of salvaged gear and a collection of increasingly anxious men and dogs. There are no oceans here, just frozen chaos. Setting up takes time and effort. Tents are erected, offering a meager barrier against the wind and cold. The salvaged stoves are critical. You start setting one up, already thinking about getting some seal meat stew going. The familiar routine of preparing food is a small comfort in the face of overwhelming uncertainty. A mainstream historical fact is that the Endurance was officially abandoned on October 27, 1915, and the crew established Ocean Camp relatively close by, initially using the ship as a windbreak and source of further salvageable materials as long as possible. The site was chosen because it seemed like a large, stable flow. Keyword, seemed. As you work, you hear the final sickening sounds from the ship. A colossal groan louder and longer than any before, followed by a series of splintering crashes. You don't need to look to know what's happening. She's going under. It's a silent, internal process from your perspective now. Just sounds carried across the ice. She sinks slowly, her stern rising out of the ice one last time before disappearing into the frigid water below, leaving behind only a churned-up hole and debris. It's like a death in the family. That ship was your home, your transport, your protection, and now she's gone. Just gone. You stare at the spot where she was, a lump forming in your throat. There's a quirky tidbit related to the abandonment. Shackleton insisted on saving Frank Hurley's photographic plates, which were incredibly heavy glass plates. He had to choose which ones to keep, smashing the rest to lighten the load, making agonizing decisions about which visual records of the expedition were most important. Imagine trying to decide which photos from your holiday to keep and which to destroy, except the stakes are literally life or death, and your photos are made of fragile glass. Talk about a high-pressure filing system. Historians still argue whether leaving the Endurance when they did was the optimal strategic decision, or if waiting longer, perhaps for a different phase of ice pressure, might have offered a different outcome. But for you, the outcome is clear. Your home is gone, and you are now a resident of a temporary tent city on a giant floating ice cube. Your kitchen is a shaky stove setup outside your tent. The menu for the foreseeable future? Seal meat, lots and lots of seal meat. Because guess what salvaged item you have in relative abundance? Yes, seal carcasses. It's time to get creative, or at least filling. Time to make ice flow stew. Hope you like blubber. Setting up the galley area on the ice involves digging out a spot for the stove, sheltering it from the wind as best you can with blocks of ice and salvaged canvas. It's makeshift, cold, and incredibly exposed. Your hands are numb constantly. Every task takes twice as long. Melting snow for water is a continuous, energy-intensive process. You feel incredibly vulnerable, but the need for hot food is paramount. A warm meal isn't just about nutrition anymore. It's about morale, about a fleeting moment of comfort and normalcy in an utterly abnormal existence. You look at the faces of the men huddled in their tents, waiting for the call to supper, and you know your job is more important now than ever. You are the keeper of the flames, the alchemist turning frozen flesh and snow into something resembling sustenance. And you really hope you don't run out of biscuits. Please don't let the biscuits run out. Life at Ocean Camp settles into a monotonous, grinding routine. The novelty of abandoning the ship wears off fast, replaced by the sheer, soul-crushing effort of just existing on this frozen wasteland. Every day is a fight against the cold and the wind. Your tent is a thin barrier, offering little more than a slight temperature differential and a place to escape the direct blast of the elements. Sleeping is a challenge. The cold seeps up from the ice, and the sounds of the floe moving and groaning are constant, unnerving companions. You learn to sleep in layers inside a sleeping bag, trying to ignore the ache in your bones. Your primary job as the cook becomes an endless cycle of melting snow and preparing food. Melting snow for water is ridiculously inefficient. You need huge quantities for cooking and drinking, and it takes ages to melt enough over the limited number of salvaged stoves. It feels like you're constantly feeding the fire, adding fuel, scraping melted water into pots, only for it to freeze again if you're not careful. It's a thirsty business, this ice camp life. You find yourself dreaming about running water, about tasks, about not having to chip away at frozen precipitation just to make a cup of something warm. Oh, for a kettle that doesn't require first sourcing its contents from a snowdrift. The menu, as predicted, is overwhelmingly based on what's available. Seal meat is the staple. You prepare it in every way you can think of, which, given the circumstances and limited ingredients, isn't many. Seal stew is the most common iteration. It's oily, dark, and has a distinct, sometimes overpowering flavor. You learn to use every part. The blubber is rendered down for fat, the meat goes into the pot. Sometimes, if you're lucky and the hunters have success, there's penguin meat, which is also an acquired taste. Think fishy liver. Delicious. Your culinary creativity is less about making things taste good and more about making them edible and calorie-dense. A touch of salvaged salt is a luxury. A pinch of salvaged sugar feels like a miracle. Remember those lovely spices you had to leave on the ship? Yeah, you really miss those now. Seal stew could use a serious injection of something. Anything. The physical demands of the camp are relentless. Everyone is involved in keeping things going. You help with digging drifts away from tents, hauling ice blocks, assisting the hunters in bringing back carcasses. Your hands are perpetually chapped and sore. Your joints ache from the cold and the constant, heavy work. There's no downtime, not really. Even resting is just trying to stay warm. The concept of a day off is laughably alien. Your weekend involves slightly less urgent shoveling. A mainstream historical fact is that during this period at Ocean Camp, the crew relied heavily on hunting seals and penguins for sustenance and blubber for fuel. They consumed vast quantities of meat and blubber to maintain their caloric intake in the extreme cold. It's estimated they ate thousands of pounds of seal meat and hundreds of penguins over their time on the ice. That's a lot of interesting dinners. Imagine the grocery bill, or rather, the hunting tally. The ice flow beneath you is not static. It drifts constantly, carried by currents and wind. More unnervingly, it shifts and groans under pressure. Cracks can appear unexpectedly, sometimes running right through the camp, forcing everyone to quickly move tents and supplies. You get used to the sound, a low, resonant rumble, sometimes building to a sharp crack or a high-pitched shriek as the ice plates grind against each other. It's like living on a giant, fragile raft that might break apart at any moment. You constantly check the ground beneath your tent, half expecting to see a fissure opening up. It's the ultimate open-plan living experience, with unplanned water features. There's a quirky tidbit about how they dealt with the blubber. Rendering it down for fuel and cooking fat was crucial, but it was a messy, smelly process. The camp would often be thick with the acrid smoke and greasy smell of boiling seal blubber. Not exactly an aromatherapy spa situation. You try not to think about what your clothes smell like. Probably best not to know. Let's just say laundry isn't a priority or even a possibility. Historians still argue whether the specific route the ice flow took was influenced more by prevailing winds or ocean currents, and how this drift pattern impacted Shackleton's eventual strategy for escape. But for you, the reality is simpler. The ice is taking you somewhere, and you have absolutely no control over where. It's a truly passive form of travel. Your commute involves zero decisions, only hoping you don't hit anything big or break into a million pieces along the way. Despite the hardship, or maybe because of it, a strange camaraderie develops. Everyone is literally in the same boat, well, on the same ice flow, and survival depends on cooperation. You see men helping each other, sharing scarce resources, and keeping spirits up. There are sing-alongs, badly off-key, you imagine. Card games played with frozen fingers, and stories told to pass the endless hours of darkness in the tents. Laughter is a precious commodity, as vital in its own as the seal meat. You even manage a few jokes yourself, usually about the quality of dinner. Right, who's up for another helping of mystery meat tonight? Always gets a groan, which you count as success. You learn to find beauty in the stark landscape, the incredible colors of the sky at sunrise and sunset, the way the light reflects off the ice crystals, the sudden appearance of an emperor penguin waddling past like a distinguished gentleman in a tuxedo. These moments are fleeting but vital, little splashes of wonder in the overwhelming monochrome of white and gray. They remind you that the world outside the camp's grim reality is still vast and capable of beauty, even if it also seems utterly indifferent to your plight. You just hope the beautiful ice doesn't decide to rearrange itself under your feet tonight. That would really put a damper on the mood. As the days shorten, they don't just get shorter, they effectively vanish. You are now entering the long polar night. The sun dips below the horizon and stays there, for weeks, then months. The sky might show a faint twilight glow around noon, a weak suggestion of where the sun might be, but mostly it's just variations on dark. Deep, inky black, sometimes illuminated by the moon, sometimes by the ethereal dance of the aurora borealis, but mostly just dark. It feels like the world has forgotten about you, like hitting the lights-off switch on an entire continent. You quickly lose track of time, of days of the week. There's just the rhythm of the camp, waking, sort of, melting snow, cooking, working, trying to stay warm, sleeping, sort of. The darkness presses in on you. It's not just the absence of light, it's a physical weight, a constant gnawing presence. It messes with your head. You find yourself staring out into the blackness, seeing things that aren't there, your mind playing tricks. The silence can be deafening, broken only by the wind howling around the tents or the ominous groans and protests of the ice floe underfoot. Everyone becomes a little more withdrawn, a little more irritable. Cabin fever takes on a whole new meaning when your cabin is a canvas tent on a drifting ice raft in the middle of eternal night. It's like the longest, coldest camping trip in history, where nobody remembered to pack the board games and the only snacks are seal-flavored. Your world shrinks to the confines of the camp. You venture out only when necessary, for hunting if conditions allow, or for essential chores. Each step away from the cluster of tents feels like stabbing into the void. You cling to the faint light spilling from tent entrances, to the shared humanity huddled together against the immense, indifferent dark. Remember those jokes you were making about the seal meat? They still happen, but they're delivered with less energy, perhaps a touch more desperation. Laughter is still there, yes, but it's a little thinner, a little more forced, like stretching a thin blanket over a freezing body. And then there's the ship. Endurance. It's still there, listing in the ice, a constant, heartbreaking reminder of where you came from and what you've lost. You can't see it clearly in the dark, but you can hear it. Oh, you can hear it. The ice isn't finished with her. Day after day, night after night, you hear the terrible sounds of wood and steel giving way. The ice, shifting and grinding, is slowly, inexorably crushing the life out of her. Sharp cracks, rending screeches, deep, resonant thuds. It sounds like a dying beast, like a giant's bones breaking. Every noise is a fresh blow, another piece of your past slipping away. It's like watching a slow-motion car crash of your entire former life. Your job continues, keeping everyone fed and watered. Melting snow in the dark is even more tedious. You huddle over the smoky blubber stove, the faint light illuminating the steam rising from the pot, the endless task of turning solid ice into liquid water. The seal meat stew is still the main event. You try to vary the texture sometimes, maybe make a thick soup, maybe something closer to a hash, but it's all seal all the time. You learn to identify cuts by feel in the dim light, differentiating blubber from meat, bone from sinew. Your sense of smell becomes acutely attuned to the greasy, smoky, gamey aroma of your kitchen. It's not exactly Michelin star, but it keeps the calories coming in. A mainstream historical fact is that the polar night in this latitude south of the Antarctic Circle lasts for several months, during which the sun remains below the horizon. This extreme period of darkness significantly impacted the crew's morale in daily life, adding a profound psychological challenge to their physical struggle. It wasn't just cold and hungry, it was also endlessly, oppressively dark. Hard to see what you're eating when you're eating it. The ice floe continues its unpredictable journey. You are entirely at its mercy, drifting northwest into the Weddell Sea. The sounds of the ice, the cracking, the groaning, the sudden violent heaves are a constant soundtrack to your life. Sometimes new pressure ridges build up near the camp, walls of ice pushed violently upwards. You have to be vigilant, watching for signs that the floe might split right beneath you. It's hard to feel secure when the very ground you're standing on is actively trying to rearrange itself. It feels like living on a giant frozen jello mold that's being shaken by a mischievous child. There's a quirky tidbit about how they tried to maintain some semblance of order and routine during the polar night. Shackleton encouraged activities like reading, by limited lamplight, sing-alongs, and even impromptu lectures from the scientists in the crew on various topics. Anything to keep minds occupied and morale from plummeting entirely into the abyss of darkness and despair. You might find yourself listening to a talk on marine biology while simultaneously trying to stop your breath from freezing to your mustache. Multitasking in the extreme. Historians still argue whether the location where the Endurance became trapped was particularly unfortunate due to the prevailing ice conditions in the Weddell Sea that season, or if any ship attempting this route would have faced similar insurmountable challenges. But for you, the argument is moot. The ship is trapped, the dark is here, and your survival depends on the ice holding together and drifting towards a place where escape might eventually be possible. You just hope the ice floe has a better sense of direction than a lost tourist with a broken G-piece. Despite the hardships, there are moments, the incredible spectacle of the aurora australis dancing across the black sky in shimmering curtains of green and purple light. It's breathtaking, otherworldly, a reminder that even in this desolate place, there is immense, terrible beauty. You stand outside your tent, shivering, mesmerized, briefly forgetting the cold, the dark, the hunger, the constant fear. These glimpses of wonder are precious, like tiny gems found in the permafrost. They sustain you just a little bit until the next time the ice groans or the wind tears at your tent. And then it's back to reality, which for you currently smells heavily of seal oil. The sounds of the Endurance protesting against the ice, which had been a constant background noise, a sort of mournful soundtrack to your polar night, suddenly intensify. It's no longer just groans and screeches. It's sharp, violent cracks, like pistol shots echoing in the immense silence. The ship is dying, and you can hear every agonizing moment of it. You listen from your tent, huddled in your sleeping bag, the sounds vibrating through the ice floe beneath you. Each crack feels personal, like a piece of your own hope splintering away. It's the sound of your ride home being systematically dismantled by nature's most powerful crusher. Then, one day, though day is a generous term in the perpetual twilight, the sounds reach a horrifying crescendo. There's a final series of massive, rending crashes, a deep, drawn-out groan that seems to encompass all the pain and loss of the past months. And then, a sickening, rushing quiet. It's over. The ship that carried you here, the one that was supposed to take you back, has succumbed. She's gone, sunk beneath the ice, a silent, watery tomb in the heart of the frozen desert. It feels incredibly strange, the absence of that noise. Like the silence after a storm, only this storm just took your house with it. Shackleton gives the order. The camp must move away from the site of the wreck. The ice pressure that destroyed the ship could potentially split the floe right where you are. So in the dim, perpetual twilight, you pack up the tents, the limited gear you have, and whatever supplies were salvaged before the final moments. You trudge across the uneven, snow-covered ice, setting up a new camp a short distance away. This is now officially Ocean Camp. Your home is no longer connected to the structure of a ship, however broken. It's just canvas tents pitched directly on the drifting ice. It feels incredibly exposed, like camping on a giant, white placemat in the middle of nowhere. The loss of the Endurance hits hard. She wasn't just a vessel. She was your base, your shelter, your connection to the world you left behind. Seeing her go, or rather, hearing her go, is a profound psychological blow. Men who have held it together through months of cold and hunger show tears. It's a very real death, the death of their primary hope of rescue. Now, survival depends entirely on the ice floe taking you to a place where rescue is even theoretically possible, and on the supplies and lifeboats salvaged from the wreckage. You manage to save a few things: warm clothing, some essential tools, navigating instruments, photographs, and crucially, several of the ship's boats. It's like starting over, but with even less than nothing, and the knowledge that your best laid plans have spectacularly failed. Your kitchen setup is now even more rudimentary. It's essentially just a blubber stove, a pot, and maybe a small collapsible table if you were lucky enough to salvage one. You're cooking out in the elements, huddled near the stove for warmth, constantly battling the wind and the drifting snow. The menu remains consistent: seal meat, seal blubber, seal meat. Sometimes you render down blubber for cooking fuel. Sometimes you try to fry chunks of meat. Mostly you're making stew or soup. It's nutritious, yes, packed with calories, but the monotony is soul-crushing. You dream of vegetables, of bread, of anything that didn't have a face yesterday. Sometimes you wonder if you'll ever eat a meal indoors again, or one that doesn't leave a thin, greasy film on everything you own. A mainstream historical fact is that the Endurance was finally crushed and sank on November 21st, 1915, after being trapped in the ice for 10 months. This date marked a critical turning point, forcing the crew to abandon all hope of the ship surviving and committing them entirely to life on the unstable ice floe. It was the end of an era and the beginning of an even more uncertain one. Like finally deleting that dating app, realizing you're actually on your own now. The work is physically demanding and mentally taxing in the dark. Hauling snow and ice for melting, chopping up frozen seal carcasses, tending the smoky, smelly stove. Your hands are constantly cold, even when you're working. Frostbite is a constant risk. You learn to recognize the dull ache that signals danger. Everything takes longer, requires more effort, in the biting cold and the perpetual gloom. Even the simple act of stirring a pot feels like a major undertaking when you're shivering uncontrollably. There's a quirky tidbit about the crew's attempts to maintain morale after the sinking. They made a football out of a stick egg stuffed with reindeer hair and played matches on the ice despite the freezing temperatures and uneven ground. It was a small act of defiance against the overwhelming bleakness, a way to inject a little bit of normal into their impossibly abnormal existence. You might watch from your makeshift kitchen, occasionally tossing them a chunk of seal meat like a canine treat, wondering if they realize how ridiculous they look, playing soccer on a giant ice cube in the middle of nowhere. Historians still argue whether the decision to abandon ship earlier might have allowed for more supplies or even the ship itself to be saved, or if the pressure was simply too immense and the outcome inevitable, regardless of the timing. But for you, the cook, the debate is academic. The ship is gone, and your focus is entirely on the present, making sure the salvage stove doesn't blow up, the precious blubber fuel lasts, and there's enough seal soup to keep the men alive on this cold, hard, white stage. Life on Ocean Camp is sparse and brutal. Your world is now just tents, ice, and the boundless, dark, and cold expanse of the Weddell Sea ice floe. Every day is a negotiation with survival. You check the ice around the camp constantly, listening for new cracks, watching for signs of the floe breaking up under you. The sounds of the ice cracking have replaced the sounds of the ship cracking, a new, more terrifying soundtrack. It feels like living on a giant, delicate meringue that's about to shatter. But somehow you keep going. You melt the snow, you chop the seal, you stir the pot. Because that's what you do. You make soup. Life on Ocean Camp settles into a rhythm, if you can call this precarious existence a rhythm. It's less a beat, more a slow, agonizing drift, punctuated by the terrifying sounds of the ice shifting beneath you. You are now entirely at the mercy of the floe, this giant, unstable raft carrying you and your companions across the vast, frozen emptiness of the Weddell Sea. The silence is immense, broken only by the wind, the occasional cry of a seal, and the constant, unnerving groaning and cracking of the ice. You feel impossibly small, a speck of humanity on a moving white plate in the middle of nowhere. Your days are dictated by the brutal reality of the pain and the constant need for sustenance. You wake up shivering, even inside your sleeping bag, the tent offering only a fragile barrier against the biting air. The first task is often melting snow for water, a never-ending process. You stumble out, maybe holding a frozen enamel mug, and start shoveling snow onto the blubber stove. The smell of burning blubber is thick and acrid, clinging to everything, but it's the smell of warmth and survival, so you learn to tolerate it. Probably gives your soup that je ne sais quoi nobody asked for. As the cook, your routine is centered around the stove. Chopping frozen seal meat is an exercise in frustration and brute force. The carcasses are like blocks of ice with bones and fur. You use axes and knives, your hands quickly going numb despite thick mitts. Then there's the rendering of blubber, boiling it down to create fuel. It's a messy, smelly business, but without that greasy fire, there's no hot food, no melted snow, no warmth. Your clothes are permanently stained with grease in the dark, rich blood of seals and penguins. You're basically a walking advertisement for a very niche, very cold butcher shop. Meals are simple, repetitive affairs. Seal meat stew, seal meat fried, seal meat boiled. Sometimes penguin meat, which is even richer and tastes vaguely of fish and despair. The lack of variety is a grinding psychological pressure. You dream of fresh vegetables, of fruit, of bread, of anything that isn't brown, fatty, and recently deceased. You try to make the most of what you have, maybe adding a bit of salt if it was salvaged, but mostly it's just meat and melted snow. You're a culinary artist with one color on your palette, seal. The ice floe itself is a living, breathing, or perhaps groaning entity. It's not a flat, stable surface. It's a jumble of pressure ridges, hummocks, and leads, cracks that open up in the ice, sometimes wide enough to reveal the dark water beneath. Walking around camp requires caution. One wrong step could land you in the frigid sea. You constantly scan the horizon or if what passes for it in the perpetual twilight, looking for signs of open water, of land, of anything but endless white. The flow drifts unpredictably, at the mercy of currents and wind. Every day is a gamble on where you'll end up, or if the ice will hold together long enough to get you there. A mainstream historical fact is that the crew spent nearly 6 months drifting on this ice floe after the Endurance sank. From November 1915 until April 1916, the ice was their only home and vehicle. This prolonged, passive waiting was an immense test of patience and endurance, perhaps even more so than the active struggles. Imagine being stuck on a giant, slow-moving conveyor belt to somewhere, maybe, hopefully. Maintaining morale is a constant battle. Shackleton encourages activities, sing-alongs, card games, even lectures on various topics given by the men. There's a desperate attempt to cling to some semblance of normal life, to intellectual stimulation beyond the sheer, brutal mechanics of survival. You might listen in from the warmth of the stove, stirring a pot of seal blubber, and reflecting on the sheer absurdity of discussing literature while drifting on an ice cube in the middle of the Antarctic winter. It's a surreal comedy act nobody signed up for. There's a quirky tidbit about the crew's relationship with the sled dogs. Before the ship sank, they had many dogs. As supplies dwindled on the ice, the heartbreaking decision was made to cull some of the dogs, using their meat to supplement the men's diet and feed the remaining dogs. This was a brutal necessity, deeply upsetting to men who had bonded with the animals. You, as the cook, had the grim task of preparing this meat. It's a moment you try not to dwell on, a stark reminder of the desperate measures required to stay alive. The silence afterwards was louder than any barking. Historians still argue whether Shackleton's initial decision to overwinter in the ice was the most strategic move, or if a more aggressive push north before winter set in might have offered a better chance of escape for the Endurance. But for you, stirring your blubber-infused soup, the academic debates seem distant and irrelevant. The past is gone, sunk with the ship. All that matters is the present, the cold, the drift, and making sure the next meal is ready, providing the calories needed to endure another day on this fragile, frozen island. The constant cold seeps into your bones, a deep ache that never fully goes away. Your fingers and toes are always on the verge of frostbite. You learn to wiggle them constantly, check for the telltale white patches. Sleep is fitful, disturbed by the cold, the wind, and the sounds of the ice. Every morning feels like a small victory, another day you've managed to survive. And every day the ice drifts on, carrying you somewhere, anywhere towards an uncertain fate. Your world is reduced to the immediate, the heat of the stove, the taste of seal, the faces of the men you are trying to keep alive. The tenuous stability of your icy home begins to erode, literally and figuratively. The cracks you've been navigating around for months start to widen, turning into significant leads of dark, frigid water. The deep groans and creaks of the ice become more frequent, louder, more ominous. It feels like the whole world beneath you is sighing, a giant, exhausted creature preparing to shatter. Pressure ridges buckle and collapse, creating impassable walls of ice rubble. The flow isn't just drifting anymore, it's actively disintegrating around you. You wake up one morning to a particularly violent series of reports and snaps. The tents shake, men tumble out, scrambling onto the most solid-looking ice they can find. A massive crack rips through the middle of where Ocean Camp used to be. The ice under some of the abandoned stores shears off and drifts away. It's clear the game has changed. Your comfortable-ish, seal blubber-scented patch of ice is no longer a viable base. The time for waiting is over. You have to move, and move now. The decision is made. Abandon the flow. Pack the 3 lifeboats that were salvaged from the Endurance back in October. These aren't sleek sailing vessels. They are sturdy, open wooden boats built for ship-to-shore transfers or emergencies near the coast. Now they are your only hope of reaching land, which is still hundreds of miles away. You look at the bowed, ice-choked sea, and then at the small boats and feel a cold knot form in your stomach that has nothing to do with the weather. This is it, make or break time. Probably break time, honestly. There's a feverish urgency as everyone works to prepare the boats. The James Caird, the Dudley Docker, and the Stancomb Wills become the focal point of activity. They're already heavy, but now you have to load them with essential supplies salvaged from the camp. Sleeping bags, ration bags, mostly pemmican and the last of the salvaged biscuits. Cooking gear, your pots and blubber stove are critical. Medical supplies, navigation instruments, and a limited amount of fresh water melted from snow. It's a desperate inventory, prioritizing calorie density and sheer necessity over comfort or variety. Forget packing light, you're packing for oblivion. Dragging the boats across the remaining uneven ice to reach open water is back-breaking work. The flow is a mess of hummocks and rubble. You use ropes, shoulders, sheer will. Each boat weighs a ton, literally and figuratively. The cold is a relentless enemy, freezing your hands, stiffening ropes, making the wooden hulls like blocks of ice. You sweat with exertion despite the sub-zero temperatures, the vapor freezing on your beard and eyebrows. It's a brutal, silent struggle, punctuated only by grunts of effort and the sickening sounds of wood scraping on ice. When you finally reach a lead wide enough, the transition into the boat is fraught with danger. The edges of the ice are unstable. The water is full of brash ice, small, sharp pieces that can damage the hull. Getting men and gear into the bobbing boats requires careful balance and coordination. One slip, one moment of clumsiness, and you're in the water. A death sentence in these temperatures unless you're pulled out immediately. Your role is crucial, making sure the cooking gear and precious food supplies are loaded securely, helping hoist bags that feel heavier than stones. It's a wet, freezing, terrifying process. A mainstream historical fact about this period is that the crew spent only a few days attempting to sail north through leads in the ice after abandoning the main flow. The ice was still too thick and pervasive. They quickly realized that true open water travel wasn't yet possible, and they were forced to haul the boats out onto another, smaller, more temporary ice flow. So the breakup didn't immediately lead to a long sea voyage, but rather a series of desperate, short stints of rowing or sailing, punctuated by back-breaking hauls onto fragile ice platforms. It was a frustrating stop-start nightmare. You find yourself crammed into one of the boats, maybe the Dudley Docker or the Stancomb Wills, surrounded by men in gear. The perspective shift is jarring. Seconds ago, you were standing on land, albeit frozen land. Now you're floating precariously on the water, eye level with the crumbling ice edges, acutely aware of the thin layer of wood separating you from the abyss. The silence of the flow camp is replaced by the lapping of water, the creak of the oars, and the constant crunch and scrape of ice against the hull. It's like you traded one shaky platform for another, slightly wetter one. What could possibly go wrong? Oh wait, everything. There's a quirky tidbit about one of the boats, the James Caird. Before launching into the epic journey later, Shackleton had it extensively modified by the ship's carpenter, McNish. They raised its sides, added a makeshift deck, and strengthened its structure using whatever materials they could find, including pieces of old sledges and even canvas from tents. These modifications were absolutely crucial for the boat's later survival of monstrous seas. So while you're launching these boats now, they're in their relatively original, less than ocean-ready state, adding another layer of oof to the situation. Historians still argue whether abandoning the main ice flow precisely when they did was the optimal timing, or if waiting slightly longer for more significant ice melt might have yielded a more direct path to open water, saving them the subsequent arduous boat hauling. But for you, perched precariously in a freezing wooden boat surrounded by ice chunks, the debate feels purely academic. You're out of options. The ice camp is gone. The boats are all you have. The cramped conditions in the boat are immediate. Men are packed shoulder to shoulder, trying to find a way to sit comfortably while not putting a hole in something vital. Your legs cramp, your back aches. The spray from the ice-choked water freezes instantly on your clothes. You pull your hood tighter, huddle deeper into your minimal gear. This isn't sailing, it's navigating a maze made of frozen daggers and despair. And you still have to figure out how to make a hot meal in the... Maybe a floating kitchen concept wasn't fully considered in the boat design. You paddle, you row, you push off ice floes with oars, trying to find a path north. Progress is painfully slow. The ice is thick, unpredictable. Sometimes you get a few hundred yards, sometimes you're stopped dead. The physical effort is immense, exhausting. Your muscles burn, your lungs ache from the cold air. And every so often you have to repeat the horrific process of hauling the heavy boat out of the water and onto a new temporary flow when forward progress by boat becomes impossible. It's a cycle of hope, exhaustion, and crushing disappointment. Your feet are constantly wet and cold. You dream of dry socks like others dream of paradise. Your cooking duties are now even more challenging. Trying to operate a blubber stove in an open boat, potentially rocking on the water, or perched precariously on a small ice floe, is an exercise in frustration and danger. Spilled blubber could mean no fuel. A tipped pot could mean lost food. You huddle in the lee of some gear or a sail, trying to shield the flame from the wind, melting snow or ice chunks chipped from the floe, coaxing another batch of seal pemmican stew into something vaguely edible. It's a precarious, dangerous, smoky undertaking, but the survival of everyone depends on those precious calories and that little bit of warmth from the hot meal. You are the guardian of the caloric gates. The uncertainty is a heavy, invisible weight. Where are you drifting? How long will this phase last? Will the ice ever fully break up? Will the boats survive the open sea, assuming you ever reach it? You look at the faces of the men around you, tired, gaunt, etched with worry. You see fear in their eyes and you know it mirrors the fear in your own. But you also see resilience, a grim determination to keep going. You are all in this together, packed into these small wooden shells, adrift in a world of ice and water, hoping against hope for a miracle. You haven't exactly reached paradise. Surprise, surprise. After the brief, terrifying attempt at actual sailing and the brutal labor of hauling the boats out of the water, you've landed on another ice floe. Call it Ice Flow Camp 2.0. It's smaller, less stable feeling than the last one, and everyone knows this isn't a long-term lease. The tents are up again, pitched quickly and with less ceremony. There's no attempt to build walls or make it feel like home. This is just a temporary platform, a pause button until the ice either melts enough to truly sail or breaks up completely and sends you swimming. Optimism? What's that? Is it edible? The routine is similar to ocean camp, but grimmer. You're still cooking, still dealing with blubber smoke and frozen fingers, but the larder is much, much leaner. The seal population seems to have thinned out in this area, or maybe they're just wiser. Your stews are thinner, the pemmican stretches further, and the desperate hunger is a constant companion again, gnawing at your gut even after a meal. You measure out rations with a heavy heart, knowing that every spoonful is precious, and the supply isn't infinite. Maybe if you stir it really fast, it'll look like more. Worth a shot? Probably not. The days blur into a monotonous cycle of waiting, watching the ice, attempting short, exhausting boat journeys whenever a potential lead appears, and then inevitably hauling the boats back out onto yet another flow when the leads close up or the ice gets too thick. This repeated hauling of the James Caird, Dudley Docker, and Stancomb Wills is back-breaking, spirit-crushing work. You strain at the ropes, your muscles screaming, your breath coming in ragged waves in the frigid air. It feels like you're moving slower than the drift of the ice itself, which is probably true. This isn't upper body conditioning. This is just deeply unfortunate, involuntary weightlifting with wooden boats. The psychological toll of this phase is immense. On ocean camp, there was a sense of being stuck, but on a relatively large, stable platform. Here, the instability is palpable. Cracks form closer to your tents. The groans of the ice are louder, more intimate. You sleep with one ear open, half expecting to be jolted awake by the flow splitting beneath you. The world feels smaller, colder, more hostile. Even the penguins and seals are less frequent visitors now. It's just you, the men, the boats, and endless, hostile ice. A mainstream historical fact about this period is that the crew spent a combined total of nearly 3 months living on these ice floes after abandoning the Endurance. They drifted approximately 1,200 miles north during this time, carried along by the currents. This wasn't a quick stay. It was a significant portion of their ordeal, a period of slow, agonizing progress, or often no progress at all, just drift. It gives you a sense of the sheer scale of the waiting game you were forced to play. The lack of basic hygiene becomes another grinding misery. You haven't had a proper wash in months. Your clothes are stiff with grime, blubber smoke, and salt spray. Your beard is a frozen, tangled mess, often icing up solid with condensation from your breath. It's hard to even keep your face clean enough to avoid painful cracks and sores. Trying to maintain any sense of personal care feels futile against the relentless assault of dirt and cold. Your smell would probably register on a seismograph. There's a quirky tidbit about how they tried to maintain morale during this desolate period. Despite the grim circumstances, they continued activities like reading aloud from salvaged books, telling stories, and even holding sing-songs. These small attempts at normalcy, at creating moments of shared humanity amidst the desolation, were incredibly important for keeping spirits from completely breaking. You might find yourself humming along to a surprisingly cheerful tune about sailing while perched precariously on an iceberg, which feels ironic. Historians still argue whether the sheer monotony of this prolonged waiting game on the ice floe or the constant physical exhaustion of repeatedly attempting to move the boats was the greater psychological burden during this period. For you, stuck in the middle of it, it's less about which is worse and more about how the two combine into a perfect storm of misery. The waiting makes the labor feel pointless, and the labor makes the waiting feel endless. It's a delightful paradox of suffering. Your kitchen setup is even more basic here. It's just the blubber stove, maybe sheltered behind a small wall of ice blocks, or a piece of salvaged canvas if you're lucky. The wind is your enemy, trying to extinguish the flame, blowing snow into your pots. Melting ice for water is a constant, fuel-intensive task. Every lump of blubber, every fragment of wood, increasingly rare, is gold. You become hyper-aware of waste. Not a drop of melted snow, not a crumb of pemmican is left behind. You scrape the pots clean with a spoon, then lick the spoon clean, then contemplate licking the pot just in case. The dwindling supplies add another layer of anxiety. You see the level of the pemmican bag going down. You count the remaining biscuits, precious relics of a warmer, more civilized time. Every meal is a reminder of what you don't have and what you might not have tomorrow. As the cook, you feel the weight of this responsibility acutely. You are literally the last line of defense against starvation. No pressure or anything. The landscape itself is starting to change slightly as you drift further north. The days are getting marginally longer, but the ice remains stubbornly thick. You see fewer vast, solid fields and more areas of broken, jumbled ice, indications of pressure and movement, but not the kind that allows easy passage. It's a dynamic, dangerous environment. You are constantly scanning the horizon, hoping for the dark line of open water that never seems to materialize, or watching the ice underfoot for signs of cracking. The men are quieter now, less prone to chatter, more withdrawn into their own thoughts or into the immediate, demanding task at hand. There's a sense of grim endurance, a silent agreement to just keep putting one foot in front of the other, or one oar stroke after another, or one rope pull after another. Jokes are fewer, smiles rarer. You offer around the meager rations, trying to meet each man's eye, a small shared moment of solidarity in the face of overwhelming adversity. You are all simply surviving, barely. You drift on, a tiny speck on a vast, white, indifferent canvas. The wind whips around the tents. The ice groans its mournful tune. You huddle deeper into your sleeping bag, dreaming of warmth, of food, of solidity. But when you wake, the reality is the same. The precarious flow, the waiting boats, the dwindling stores, and the knowledge that the hardest part is likely still ahead. This temporary camp feels less like a refuge and more like a launching pad into further uncertainty. The ice finally gives you a push, not a gentle nudge, more like a violent shove. The floe you've been camping on, your precarious platform, begins to break up in earnest. Cracks spiderweb from the edges, widening with alarming speed. The groaning becomes a roar, the ice protesting its imminent dissolution. There's no debate, no prolonged discussion. It's a mad scramble to get the boats launched before the platform collapses completely. You lash down the last bits of gear in the bottom of the Dudley Docker, a small, heavy boat, trying to ignore the sickening lurch of the ice beneath your feet. You shove off, pulling away from the disintegrating floe, leaving behind the only surface you've stood on for weeks, heading out into the dark, open water. And just like that, you're sailors again. Sort of. Getting into the boat feels less like boarding a vessel and more like climbing into a wet, uncomfortable shoe that's about to sink. The Dudley Docker, sturdy but slow, is packed to the gunnels with men and supplies. There's barely room to shift your weight. You huddle down trying to find a spot that isn't directly in a puddle or constantly being splashed. The moment you push away from the ice, the ocean immediately reminds you who's in charge. Waves, even relatively small ones, slap against the sides, sending bone-chilling spray over everyone. Within minutes, you are soaked through. Your clothes, already stiff with previous grime and salt, are now heavy and cold against your skin. It feels like wearing a soggy, frozen blanket made of misery. The simple act of existence in the boat is a battle. You can't stand up, can't stretch out. Your legs cramp, your back aches. The constant motion, the pitching and rolling, is relentless. Some men succumb to seasickness, adding another layer of unpleasantness to the already dire situation. There's no way to cook, no way to get truly warm. Meals are cold, hard pemmican gnawed directly from the block, washed down with brackish, melted snow water that tastes faintly of blubber. Trying to keep anything dry is a joke. You bail constantly, your frozen hands aching with the effort, scooping water out only for the next wave to dump more back in. It's like trying to empty a bathtub with a teacup while the faucet is running. The destination is Elephant Island. Just saying the name feels like a prayer. It's a tiny speck of land, supposedly uninhabited, but land nonetheless. A solid place to stand. The goal is to reach it, roughly 80 miles away, navigating through often rough seas in open boats. You peer out over the waves, scanning the horizon for anything that isn't gray sea and gray sky. There's the James Caird, Shackleton's boat, smaller but faster, pushing ahead with its chosen crew. There's the Stancomb Wills somewhere nearby. You're a small, vulnerable convoy, totally at the mercy of the wind and waves. Good times. A mainstream historical fact about this leg of the journey is that the 3 boats carrying all 28 men took about 7 days to reach Elephant Island. This was a remarkable feat of seamanship and endurance, navigating treacherous waters with limited visibility and constant exposure to the elements. 7 days of this non-stop misery. Let that sink in. You try to find comfort in the fact that you are part of a famous historical event, but mostly you just wish you were part of a famous historical event that involves central heating and dry socks. Sleep is almost impossible. You doze fitfully, crammed in amongst the other men, the boat lurching under you, the spray stinging your face even in the dark. Waking up is like being dunked in an ice bath while someone hits you with a wooden plank. Your muscles are stiff, your joints scream in protest. Every movement is an effort. Trying to find a comfortable position is an exercise in futility. It's all varying degrees of terrible. It's the kind of sleep that leaves you feeling less rested and more aggressively abused. There's a quirky tidbit about how they dealt with the constant wetness. With no way to dry clothes, the men sometimes tried turning their jackets inside out in the hope that the wind and sun, if they appeared, might dry the outer layer, which was now the inner layer. It sounds logical, right? Except the conditions were so persistently damp and cold that this often did little more than ensure both sides of your jacket were equally wet and equally useless for insulation. Still, it was something to try, a small act of defiance against the pervasive damp. Historians still argue whether the constant physical drain of rowing and bailing or the psychological strain of being so exposed and vulnerable to the elements was the greater trial during the open boat journeys. For you, it's a moot point. The physical exhaustion grinds you down, making the psychological fear sharper, and the fear drains your energy, making the physical work feel impossible. It's a vicious, soggy cycle. You just focus on the rhythm of bailing, trying to keep the water level down, trying not to think about what happens if you fail. As the cook, your job is now mostly ceremonial. You can't prepare anything. You distribute the meager rations, trying to be fair, trying not to look at the empty space in your gut that seems to be growing larger every hour. You see the hunger in the men's eyes reflected back in their gaunt faces. There's no comfort food here, just the bold, hard reality of minimal calories in brutal conditions. You fantasize about hot soup, thick and rich, maybe even with a few vegetables. The fantasy is so vivid it almost makes the tasteless pemmican bearable. Almost. The lack of visibility is a constant source of anxiety. Fog rolls in, thick and disorienting, swallowing the other boats and making you feel utterly alone in the vast ocean. You rely on shouted calls or the sound of oars to keep track of each other. Navigation is incredibly difficult. Shackleton in the James Caird uses a sextant when the sun or stars are visible, making complex calculations on the fly while perched precariously in a bucking boat. The rest of you just trust he knows where he's going. You hope he's having a slightly less soggy time of it over there. The cold seeps into everything. Your feet feel like blocks of ice. Your fingers are numb and clumsy. The wind chill is brutal. Despite wearing every layer you possess, the cold penetrates your wet clothes and chills you to the bone. You shiver uncontrollably at times, your teeth chattering. Trying to warm your hands by tucking them under your armpits provides momentary pathetic relief. It's a constant, low-grade hypothermia that wears you down, sapping your strength and your will. The sight of the seabirds becomes both a comfort and a torment. Albatrosses wheel overhead, seemingly effortless in the gale. You envy their ability to fly, to escape this wet, rocking prison. Petrels flit low over the waves. They are signs of life, but also a stark reminder of how far you are from anything solid, anything resembling civilization. They belong here. You emphatically do not. You try not to think about how easily you could become just another part of their world, just another meal ticket floating in the waves. The days blur together into one long, continuous struggle against the elements. There are moments of sheer terror when a wave larger than the others threatens to swamp the boat. requiring frantic bowing and everyone holding their breath. There are moments of quiet desperation, staring out at the endless gray, wondering if you'll ever see land again. And there are brief, precious moments of shared humanity, a word of encouragement, a shared grimace, a silent understanding that you are all in this together, for better or worse. Mostly worse, currently. As the days pass, the hope solidifies. Elephant Island must be there. It has to be. You cling to that thought like a lifeline. Every painful stroke of the oar, every agonizing scoop of the bailer is directed towards that unseen goal. You are a machine now, operating on pure instinct and a desperate will to survive. The taste of salt is always on your lips. The sound of the waves is a constant roar in your ears. You just keep going, one miserable minute after another, praying for land. The strange quiet you have been living in, broken only by the ship's groans and the occasional sounds of life on the ice, begins to give way to something far more sinister. The pressure doesn't just build, it surges. The low rumbling becomes a high-pitched shriek as the ice bites down harder on the Endurance. It's like the world outside is a giant, angry jaw slowly closing around your ship. You feel it in your bones, a deep vibration that resonates through the decks, through the galley floor, right up into your teeth. The sounds are horrifying. Screams of tortured timber, bangs like pistol shots as beams split, and the sickening crunch of the hull yielding. Remember those initial gentle nudges? This is the apocalypse of those nudges. It's relentless, violent, and utterly terrifying. You brace yourself in the galley, surrounded by your pots and pans, which are now swinging wildly like drunken dancers. Dust and splinters rain down from the ceiling. You hear shouts from above, the urgent commands of the officers. There's a sense of controlled panic, a desperate energy as men rush about. You peek out the porthole, but there's nothing to see but the towering, jumbled chaos of the ice pressing in, ridges forming and cracking with explosive force. It's beautiful in a terrifying, destructive way, like watching a glacier calve. But this time, it's your home that's being devoured. You grip the edge of the workbench, feeling the deck shudder beneath you. It's a feeling of utter helplessness. There's nothing you can do. No steering, no engine power, just the ship screaming its death throes around you. The decision comes quickly, shouted down from the bridge. Abandon ship. The words hang in the air, heavy and final. You've been living on the Endurance for over a year. It's been your world, your kitchen, your shelter. Now it's dying. You have moments to grab what you can. Your mind races. What does a cook need when abandoning a ship crushed by ice in Antarctica? Not your favorite apron, sadly. Practicality overrides sentimentality. You grab essential cooking gear, a sturdy pot, some basic utensils, maybe a small sack of flour or sugar if you can find one quickly. Food is being organized by the store's officers, but your personal kit? Just the absolute necessities. Clothes, a sleeping bag, your journal maybe? It's a frantic, disorienting scramble. You feel a perverse urge to grab a can of beans, just because, beans are versatile, but there's no time for jokes, even bad ones. You spill out onto the ice pack, joining the rest of the crew. The scene is surreal. The ship is tilted, visibly broken, like a wounded animal lying on its side. The ice surrounds it, a chaotic landscape of white and blue ice ridges and deep cracks. Men are hauling supplies, dogs are barking, sledges are being loaded. The air is filled with the sounds of urgent activity and the continued terrible groaning of the ship. A mainstream historical fact is that the Endurance was finally crushed and abandoned on October 27, 1915, after being trapped for over 9 months. 9 months of waiting, hoping, and then this violent, rapid end. You stand there momentarily numb, looking at the ship that was your home, now just a wreck in the ice. Your new home is the ice. Just the ice. It's flat in places, jumbled and chaotic in others. It's wet and empty, and stretches in every direction. The wind whips across the surface, carrying fine snow crystals that sting your face. You helped set up a makeshift camp some distance from the ship, just in case it does something dramatic, like sink quickly, which it doesn't, not immediately. Tents are pitched. These are the lifeboats converted into shelters. Your kitchen is now just a stove set up on the ice, maybe sheltered by a makeshift wall of snow blocks or gear bags. The transition is stark. One moment you're cooking on a relatively stable, though tilted, galley range. The next you're trying to melt snow for water on a portable Primus stove in a freezing, exposed environment. The first meal cooked on the ice is memorable. Likely pemmican or some other preserved food, probably warmed up in that sturdy pot you managed to grab. It's not about flavor anymore. It's purely about calories and warmth. Eating standing on the ice, huddled against the wind, looking at the broken ship in the distance, is a grim experience. You miss the warmth of the galley, the predictable heat of the stove, the simple luxury of a solid floor beneath your feet. You try to find a crumb of humor in the situation, maybe commenting that at least your ingredients are now fresher than fresh, straight from the frozen wilderness. But even that feels hollow against the magnitude of what's happened. A quirky tidbit about this time is that the crew managed to salvage an incredible amount of gear and supplies from the sinking ship before it was completely swallowed by the ice, including photographs, scientific equipment, and surprisingly, even a banjo. Priorities, right? The ice continues to press and shift around the wreck. It's a constant, unsettling presence. You hear the occasional loud crack or boom as the ice moves, a reminder of the immense forces at play. There's a gnawing uncertainty that settles in. What now? You are literally adrift on an ocean of ice, miles from land, with no ship. Historians still argue whether abandoning the ship when they did was the optimal strategy, or if they could have salvaged more by waiting longer, though the ship's condition was clearly deteriorating rapidly. For you, the cook, the immediate future is brutally simple. Figure out how to feed 30-odd men in sub-zero temperatures on a moving ice floe with dwindling supplies. It's a problem statement that would make any Michelin-starred chef weep into their amuse-bouche. The ice camp becomes your new reality, a temporary, fragile island in a vast, hostile white world. You look at the horizon hoping to see something, anything other than more ice, but there is nothing. Just the crushing silence and the chilling wind. Life on the ice floe quickly settles into a harsh, temporary rhythm. The immediate shock of abandoning the ship gives way to the grim reality of your situation. You're adrift with limited supplies, and the nearest land is hundreds of miles away across unforgiving ice and turbulent seas. The decision is made. You have to try and reach land, specifically Paulet Island, where a supply depot is known to exist. The only way to get there, or even get closer, is to drag the lifeboats, which now serve as your only hope of eventual escape across open water. So, you pack up the meager camp near the wreck and prepare for a trek. This marching business is, to put it mildly, absolutely brutal. Remember those gentle strolls you took on deck, maybe admiring an iceberg? This is the polar opposite. The surface of the ice isn't flat like a ballroom floor. It's a chaotic jumble of pressure ridges, deep cracks, and slippery, uneven surfaces. Hauling heavy wooden boats, modified to function as sledges, is back-breaking work. 30 men pulling together on ropes, inching forward a few feet at a time. You take your turn on the ropes, straining every muscle, your breath freezing in the air. The boats are heavy, the runners bite into the rough ice, and progress is agonizingly slow. Some days you might cover less than a mile. Other days you make almost no progress at all, spending hours cutting a path through a particularly bad pressure ridge. Your role as cook changes again. Now, instead of a galley, your kitchen is a Primus stove set up in the snow, often shielded by a wall of ice blocks, or huddled inside one of the tents, the converted lifeboats. During the attempted march, meals are quick, often just warmed pemmican and melted snow. It's a race against the cold and the wind to get food into everyone before it freezes solid. You become incredibly efficient at melting snow, a surprisingly time-consuming process that requires constant attention to the stove. You learn to appreciate every single calorie you can get your hands on. A mainstream historical fact is that despite the immense effort, the crew only managed to drag the boats about a mile over rough ice before the futility of the task became clear. The ice was breaking up too much, the terrain too difficult, and the progress far too slow to reach any land destination before the ice itself likely broke up entirely. Recognizing the hopelessness of the continuous march, Shackleton makes the pragmatic decision to halt the trek. You stop dragging the boats and set up a more permanent camp right there on the ice floe. This becomes known as Ocean Camp. It's a flat, relatively stable area of ice, and here you dig in for another long wait. The lifeboats are pitched as tents, providing shelter from the wind and snow. A central area is established for cooking. Your kitchen is still the snow and ice, but you have slightly more time and stability than during the attempted march. Life at Ocean Camp revolves around survival, and food is at the absolute core of that. While you salvage some provisions from the Endurance, they are finite. The primary source of fresh food and life-giving calories becomes the seals and penguins that occasionally appear near your ice floe. The hunters among the crew become essential, and you become essential to processing and preparing their catch. Seal blubber is rendered down for fuel for the stoves and for warmth. Seal meat, and occasionally penguin meat, becomes the staple of your diet. Preparing seal meat in these conditions is a unique challenge. It's tough, dark meat, and there's a lot of blubber. You learn to butcher it on the ice, your hands numb with cold, trying to salvage as much as possible. Then it's into the pot. Seal stew becomes the main dish, day in and day out. Sometimes you manage to add a salvaged biscuit or a sprinkle of salt if you're lucky. The smell of cooking seal permeates the camp, a strong, gamey odor that you eventually get used to because it smells like survival. You try to make it palatable, perhaps attempting different cuts or cooking times, but fundamentally, it's seal. For variety, you might get penguin, which is even stronger and fishier than seal, prompting you to joke dryly that tonight's menu features pesky penguin a la primus, served with a side of existential dread. Maintaining hygiene and sanitation in an ice camp is another challenge. Melting snow for water is a constant chore, and using precious fuel just for washing seems an unimaginable luxury. Everyone becomes a bit aromatic. You try to keep your cooking area as clean as possible, a small island of order in the surrounding chaos. You meticulously clean your pots and utensils with snow, and maybe a tiny bit of salvaged soap if you're feeling fancy. A quirky tidbit from this time is that despite the incredibly harsh conditions, the crew made efforts to maintain morale, holding sing-alongs with the salvaged banjo and harmonica, and even celebrating birthdays and holidays. It's a testament to human resilience, or perhaps just a deep, desperate need for distraction. As the cook, you also become a sort of morale officer, whether you intend to or not. A warm meal, even if it's just seal stew again, is a moment of comfort, a small victory against the cold and the emptiness. You listen to the men's complaints, their anxieties, their hopes. You try to inject a bit of humor, maybe commenting that if anyone complains about same old seal again, you'll swap their portion for an extra helping of unrendered blubber. See how they like that? You're showing. The debate amongst historians continues to this day. Was the initial decision to march a necessary attempt, or did it waste vital energy and morale before establishing Ocean Camp? For you, living it, it just felt like a series of increasingly desperate strategies played out on an unpredictable stage. The ice floe drifts, slowly and perceptibly at first, then more noticeably, it carries you northwards, towards the open sea. You are a passenger on a massive, freezing raft. You measure your position occasionally, watching the miles to land slowly decrease, though still dauntingly far. The Endurance remains visible for a time, a poignant, broken landmark on the horizon, a constant reminder of what you've lost. Eventually, the ice shifts and breaks, and she finally slips below the surface forever. Another landmark gone, another step deeper into the unknown. But life at Ocean Camp continues. Your focus is on the fire under the pot, the quality of the seal meat, and trying to make sure everyone gets enough to eat to survive just one more day. You might wonder idly if anyone back home remembers you, or what they think you're doing right now. Probably not cooking seal stew on a drifting iceberg, you'd bet. The relative stability of Ocean Camp, such as it was, doesn't last forever. The ice floe you've been living on begins to show signs of stress. Cracks appear and widen. The surface becomes more uneven, fractured. You feel the unsettling lurch and groan as your floating island shifts and breaks beneath you. The constant low hum of the ice is replaced by sharper, more alarming sounds. Groans, snaps, distant roars as larger bergs calve off. This isn't just drifting anymore. The ice is disintegrating. It becomes clear that staying put is no longer an option. The time has come to abandon the ice altogether and commit to the treacherous sea journey in the open lifeboats, the James Caird, the Dudley Docker, and the Stancomb Wills. Packing for this final desperate move is a chaotic scramble. You salvage everything you possibly can, prioritizing food, fuel, and essential gear. The boats are loaded, sitting low in the water now, their wooden hulls scraping against the edges of the breaking ice flow. Getting everyone and everything into the boats is a feat in itself, a tense ballet on unstable footing, with the constant threat of falling into the freezing water. You secure your pots and the precious Primus stove, your most vital tools. This transition is utterly terrifying. Trading the solid, albeit temporary, platform of ice for the vast, unpredictable, and unforgiving ocean in a small, open boat feels like trading one kind of certain death for another. Slightly wetter kind. Life aboard the boats is a study in sheer, unadulterated misery. You are constantly cold, constantly wet. Icy spray lashes over the gunnels, soaking you through within minutes. There's no room to stretch out, barely any room to move. You huddle with your companions, sharing body warmth, trying to shield yourself from the wind and the waves. Sleep is fitful, if it comes at all, snatched in uncomfortable positions with the boat pitching and rolling violently. Your job as cook becomes almost impossible. How do you prepare food when you can barely stand, when the stove is a fire hazard in a wooden boat being tossed by waves? Mostly you rely on cold rations, pemmican broken into chunks, biscuits, maybe a lump of seal blubber to chew on for energy. Melting snow or ice isn't really an option unless the seas are incredibly calm, which is almost never. When conditions allow for the Primus to be lit for a brief, terrifying moment, it's usually just to melt a little ice scraped off the boat or a nearby berg into lukewarm water, perhaps to mix with a precious spoonful of dried milk or make a thin, weak soup. You have to be hyper-vigilant, holding the stove steady, shielding it from the wind, praying you don't set the boat alight. The smell of burning paraffin mixing with the salt spray and the general aroma of damp, unwashed men becomes your world. You learn to eat quickly, mechanically, focusing only on getting the calories in, not on taste or comfort. A witty shipmate might observe that tonight's special is mystery mock à la maritime, served with a side of hypothermia. And honestly, that feels about right. Days blur into nights. The physical strain of constantly bailing out water, holding onto ropes, and just enduring the bone-chilling cold is immense. The psychological toll is perhaps even greater. The sheer scale of the ocean around you is humbling and terrifying. There is nothing but waves, sky, and the endless gray horizon. You are utterly dependent on the skill of the boat handlers, the resilience of the boats themselves, and sheer luck. Historians still argue whether the decision to take to the boats when they did was perfectly timed or slightly delayed, risking the breakup of the flow too much. For you, shivering in the bottom of the boat, it just feels like the only option left in a chain of increasingly desperate choices. You scan the horizon constantly, a mix of desperate hope and crushing despair. You see other boats occasionally, tiny specks in the vastness, a reminder that you are not alone in your misery, but also that help is impossibly far away. The journey is arduous and dangerous. A quirky tidbit from similar journeys is that the constant exposure to salt spray could cause painful salt boils on the skin, adding another layer of physical torment to the already brutal conditions. Imagine having to cook or bail with blistered, raw hands. Delightful. Finally, after days that feel like weeks, a shape appears on the horizon. Land. It's not the welcoming, gentle shore you might dream of, but land nonetheless. Elephant Island. It's a stark, mountainous, ice-covered place, utterly uninhabited and inhospitable, but it is solid ground. The relief that washes over you as the boat scrapes onto the shingle beach is overwhelming. You stumble out onto the rocks, your legs weak and unsteady after days confined to the boat. You've made it this far. Landing on Elephant Island doesn't mean the end of your struggles, however. This isn't a paradise, it's a temporary refuge. The shore is rocky, exposed to the harsh Antarctic weather. There are no trees, no shelter to speak of other than what you can improvise. Your role as cook immediately resumes, but the challenges are different again. You need to set up a camp, melt snow or ice for water, and prepare food for 30 utterly exhausted men. The available food is primarily seal meat, supplemented by whatever they can catch on this desolate island, perhaps sea leopards. The seal meat here might be even tougher, perhaps with a different flavor profile than what you got on the ice floe. You sigh internally. More seal stew it is. You half joke that you're developing a new signature dish. Elephant Island Seal Surprise. The surprise is it's just more seal. Setting up a semblance of a kitchen involves finding a sheltered spot among the rocks. Maybe building a low wall of stones to protect the precious Primus stove from the relentless wind. Melting ice is a constant chore. You focus on the simple, essential task of providing calories and warmth in the form of hot food, however basic. This bleak, remote island becomes your temporary home. You've survived the sinking of the ship, the drift on the ice, the terrifying boat journey. Now you face the challenge of simply existing on Elephant Island, waiting for the next desperate gamble for survival. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The story fades now, drifting away like the ice floe itself, or like the weary thoughts of someone huddled against the relentless wind on a desolate shore. The sounds of the sea, the bite of the cold, the smell of seal blubber and paraffin, the ache in your bones, let them soften, become distant echoes. You are not there, not truly. You are safe, warm, in your own bed. The struggles of that distant time, the fight for every calorie, the sheer willpower to survive just one more day, they belong to the past, to a story you have merely visited in your mind's eye. Let the images blur, the sharp edges of the ice and rock soften. The cold recedes, replaced by the warmth of your blankets. The taste of seal stew fades, leaving only the comfort of knowing you won't need to eat anything remotely like it tonight. Breathe in slowly, letting go of the tension, the historical drama. Breathe out slowly, sinking deeper into your mattress. The long journey is over, the struggle concluded for now. The ice has stopped groaning, the boat has stopped pitching, the wind has died down. There is only quiet, calm, and the gentle pull towards rest. Let the last vestiges of the story drift away like smoke from a dying fire, leaving only peace and stillness. Sleep calls now. Let yourself answer.